um, after the session in a follow-up email. So thank you, as I said, for joining. The session will last until 12. And hopefully by the end of the session, the kind of intention is to introduce you to the carbon footprint calculator, explain what it is, kind of why we're all here. And we've also got Kelly here as well from Ebbsfleet, who's going to kind of provide some context behind the why. And then I'll just go through the system, how it works, and hopefully kind of just give some tips and tricks of sort of how to collect your data and that sort of thing, so that you can report. So we'll make a start. So a little bit of an agenda, as I said, what we're going to be kind of covering. So first of all, I'll hand over to Kelly, and she's going to provide a little bit of an introduction into the session, just to kind of set the scene as to why we're all here today.
Hi, thanks, Annabelle. Great introduction there to why we're all here today. So just to explain about Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. So we are delivering a 21st century garden city here in Ebbsfleet. We've got sustainability at its core. We've got an ambition to deliver 15,000 homes, and we're delivering employment space as well. So it's a development that's taking place over a number of years. We think the build out will be until 2035 at least. So we are partnering across all sectors to shape our a low carbon future. So our aim is to deliver a low carbon garden city, but also that means that in our own operations, our own business operations, we are looking to reach net zero by 2030. So we've done a lot of work internally as to how we operate the building that we manage, our sort of office time that we spend in office versus home working. All of those things we've looked at to try to reduce our emissions. We're looking at replacing gas boilers. We're choosing all sort of low carbon transport for all of our activities, but there's certainly more that we can do in the future that we will take part in. So one of the things that we're hoping to achieve is look at our procurement sector. So Annabelle, if you want to move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we are looking at our whole of our carbon footprint, but what we've done in the last year is look at procurement alongside all of our business activities, and we've established that procurement really does account for a huge proportion of our emissions. So we've looked at that in a bit more detail, and we've identified two categories of our procurement. So we've got a lot of development services. So we do employ a lot of engineering, infrastructure, architects and consultancy advice. So that's the majority of our spend is with those business areas. We do have a small proportion that goes towards goods and services. We do have like a placemaking function where we put on activities for residents and events. But as I said, the majority of our procurement activities do revolve around those services linked to building of roads and bridges, and we're currently looking at building a multi-storey car park. So it's a lot of consultancy advice, which is where we're hoping to engage with you on the call, because a lot of you fall into those categories with us. So I'll hand over to Annabelle now.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly, for that introduction. I really hope that kind of sets the scene as to why we're here and why you've been kind of invited to this session. So how that fits in is we've got this platform called the Carbon Footprint Calculator, which is basically designed to help you measure your carbon footprints. So I'm going to go through today basically how to use that and how that works. Just before I start, my name is Annabelle, and I work for Action Sustainability, which is the company behind the Carbon Footprint Calculator, and I work with lots of our clients and suppliers on this platform, basically supporting and kind of rolling it out and embedding it into into kind of processes. So we're going to go through the process. It's hopefully fairly self-explanatory once to get into it. It's designed to be as simple as possible. So let's go through some kind of high level, what it is, how it works, and then we'll kind of spend most of the time doing a bit of a demo to kind of walk you through the report, what sections there are, etc., and just kind of show you what it looks like, some tips and tricks of kind of how to get data, that sort of thing. And we should have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end as well. If you've got any questions, that's your time to ask them. So to start, what is the carbon footprint calculator? So it's an online platform and it's designed to help you measure your carbon footprint. And this is done by kind of you entering raw activity data, and the system then calculates the emissions associated with those activities. And what it means is you submit your report and then you'll get your own personal dashboard, and you'll then be able to kind of identify hotspots in your processes from that as well. So it's kind of, you're doing this obviously to support Ebbsfleet's projects, but also it then means that you've got a view of your own carbon footprint as an organisation as well. So it's kind of a win-win for everyone. Top features. So as I said, it kind of does what it says in the tin. It calculates your carbon footprint. The way that it kind of works is that you will submit data on your operations as a whole, and then you'll distribute a proportion of your emissions to your clients, including Ebbsfleet, and that'll be based on revenue. And I'll go through that in a bit more detail later, but essentially you don't need to be trying to calculate kind of information just relating to Ebbsfleet projects. You'll just do it for your organisation as a whole and then distribute based on revenue. If you're sitting here thinking, that's great, but actually we already know our footprint, we have two versions of the report. So we've got a simplified report and the full form. So the full form is that one that I kind of just explained about calculating emissions from a kind of, just raw data like mileage and that sort of thing. But if you do already know your emissions broken down into scope 1, 2, and 3, you can submit that data in the simplified report and then just apportion it to Ebbsfleet. So you've kind of got both options, depending on kind of where you are with this process. It's an annual report, so you don't have to worry about trying to keep up with monthly or quarterly reporting. You just do one report once per year, and then you can kind of apportion that to several clients at once as well, which we'll go through a little bit as well. So hopefully it's designed to make it as streamlined and simple as possible, and to really reduce the reporting burden on you so that it's just making it, kind of as easy as it can be. And as I kind of alluded to, once you submit your report, you'll then get your own dashboards with graphs. So you'll be able to actually kind of visualize and interpret your company's data as well. So kind of look at your emissions as well. So that's kind of the output from the report. The key benefits, we'll start with the main one. It's free for you to use. So it's funded by clients like Ebbsfleet, and that means it's free for you to report your own carbon footprint. As I said before, it's really designed to kind of streamline the process. So we'll go through the actual report, but it's pretty straightforward. It's broken down into different tabs and different sections. It's really to like outline what kind of categories of information you can collect. And it's standardized, so you'll be doing the same report as everyone else. It just means that then all the data we're kind of getting is in the same format as well. And crucially, that output with your own dashboards, being able to see your carbon footprint as an organisation, that can help inform kind of data-driven actions. You can kind of look at any, what are your main areas that are kind of contributing to your carbon footprint and that sort of thing. But it just really, and just finally, it's really kind of designed to save you as much time as possible, because you're doing one report once per year, and then that can kind of be applied to several clients at once. So you're not having to do different reports for different people in different formats. But as I said, we can kind of go through that a little bit later on. So I hope that gives you kind of a good overview. I know that was a fairly whistle-stop tour, but it's hopefully fairly straightforward in terms of it's an annual report. You do data for your organisation as a whole, and it's kind of all laid out for you, and you don't have to do any calculations yourself. The system will do that. So just to kind of set the bigger scene, you're not being asked this in isolation. We've got, I think actually, and probably to update the slide, we've got well over 2,000 suppliers and subcontractors in the system now. And these are just some of the clients that are kind of on board with this. You may see companies that you're working with currently. So it just means that when you go to submit this report, you can kind of apportion your data to other clients as well, even if they haven't asked you. You can do that so that you're really demonstrating your commitment to sustainability, and by proactively kind of reporting your emissions to clients, to kind of keep competitive. It's ever-changing climate. So what we're going to do now is just go through the system itself, and just kind of walk you through what the report looks like, what sort of data is in the report, tips and tricks on how to get data and that sort of thing. And if you've got any questions throughout, feel free to put them in the kind of chat or Q&A function, and we can kind of pick those up either as we go or at the end, depending if I see them or not when I'm showing the portal. So when you log in, what we'll do is in the follow-up, I can give you some details really how to register, but essentially you just create an account. You'll basically be taken directly to this report. So it's broken down into 4 steps. So step 1 is selecting the reporting period for the data. So with that, basically pick in the drop down list. This is a test account, so I'm not sharing any secrets. And with this demo account, I've already submitted some reports, but you can submit a report from 2018 onwards. So if you do want to kind of go back for previous years and submit reports, so you can kind of compare year on year, you can do that. But the ask here from Ebbsfleet is for you to submit your 2024 data. So with that, you'll see here it says 1st January to 31st December. Just to kind of note that data, if you kind of operate in line with a different year internally, you don't have to gather data for the calendar year. If you, for example, operate in line with the financial year, you can submit data in this report that would be spanning April 24 to through to March 2025. If you've got your own other kind of internal reporting year, as long as it spans 2024, that's completely fine, as long as wherever you kind of leave off this report, pick up for next year for the next report, so the data's continuous, that's okay. And with that, I'll just show you kind of where to put a note of that in the report, just so that we know what year that data's for. With the report type, this is that simplified versus full form report that I spoke about before. So if you already know your emissions, you click yes to this question, you click proceed, the report will refresh, and then you'll be taken to the simplified report. So my internet's being a bit slow today, sorry if that took a while. And basically this is what the simplified report looks like. So it's broken down by scope. Scope 3 is broken down into 15 categories. So if you have got that breakdown, you can enter that. If you don't, you can just enter that at the bottom here in terms of carbon equivalent. And then basically add some company information, and then you apportion to your clients. So if you do know your emissions already, you can just do this simplified report. It shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes, and that's kind of you done. If you're new to this and you need to do the full form report, and I'd imagine that probably will be the majority of you, you click no to this question, the page will then refresh, and then you'll be taken to the full form report. And that's where I'm going to focus this session, just so we can kind of go through the different areas, but we can kind of still use the principles of like how the report works through that. So step 2 is some high level company information. Basically, it's about your sector, about kind of what your organisation and the nature of organisations, the operation locations, and that sort of thing. Why we asked this is we're going to be using this data to then in the future create benchmarks, and you can see how your emissions compare to organisations in the same sector as you, similar size, that sort of thing. But obviously, to be able to make those benchmarks, we need to know what size company you are, for example, to kind of make those. So that's what this section is. Hopefully fairly self-explanatory. Once you've completed this, just click save, and that'll then change to complete. The third step is the actual report itself, and this is kind of where the kind of majority of this demo will focus on. And essentially, it's broken down into a selection of tabs across the top. I know when I click on this, it might look like a lot, but it's broken down into the tabs to make it more straightforward. So not all of the tabs have as much information like this. For example, the water tab is a very short tab. So do not fear, it's not as much as it looks like. I think the key thing I kind of want to just, preface before we start is that you don't, obviously in an ideal world, you'll have all this data to hand and be able to submit it next week. But we're not expecting you to have all this data. If this is the first time you're doing something like this, you might not be currently collecting data on your waste produced, for example. And we just really want to kind of encourage you to not let the data you don't have prevent you from actually submitting the report in the first place, because this is really a long-term exercise. It's designed to be a year-on-year exercise, and really, report what you have got this year, and then look at kind of expanding the net of the types of data that you could start collecting to kind of more accurately and fully measure your carbon footprint as an organisation, because it's kind of laid out to show you what you can start collecting on to kind of cover your carbon footprint. And if you don't have data on some of these areas, um, you can't submit data if you don't have it. But what we would really encourage you is to use this as a kind of framework to start expanding the data that you're recording as an organisation, so you can start kind of reporting these sort of things. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through the tabs. I'll go through the transport tab in more detail, and then the next ones will kind of just go through more high level. Don't need to go through the entire report with a fine tooth comb. So kind of key things to note is always check the units in the report. So you'll see if there's company transport, we have you can kind of choose between miles and kilometres. Then, for example, under electricity, it's in kind of a flat kilowatt hours. So just make sure that the data that you have matches what's been asked for in the report. And I know that sounds very simple, but it's just worth reiterating to always check the units. I always feel like I'm at school and the teacher telling everyone that. But it is really important to check the units, particularly with things like kilograms and tons. We're going to be misrepresenting the quantities if they're in the wrong unit. If you do make a mistake like that, we can go back and you can edit your report. But obviously, save a long time and just check the units. And if you've got data in a different unit, just convert it before you enter it, just so that it's as accurate as possible. You'll see that we've kind of got a couple of different sections within in the transport tab. We've got company transport and then third party. The distinction with this is that company transport is for any transport undertaken in vehicles owned or controlled by your organisation, and third party is for private vehicles. With anything like that, if you've got any questions, there's eye icons kind of throughout the report that you can just hover over with your cursor, and there'll be more information that'll kind of come up, which basically explains what I just said, but in more detail. And with that, just to make sure that you're not double counting, so making sure that if you've got any company vehicles, for example, you're not reporting the mileage in both sections. Just do it kind of in one. There's also kind of other vehicles here and here. So we've kind of just got this as a toggle just so that it's a bit neater. But for example, under the third party transport, we've got a lot of different vehicle types. So for example, kind of national rail train, motorbikes, taxis, like ferries, planes, etc., electric cars, hybrid cars, vans, etc. So we've got quite a lot of different vehicle types that are kind of an offer. And with this, we are constantly kind of adding to the report as well, just as kind of more conversion factors. So that's what's kind of used in the background to calculate the emissions are published by the government. We kind of expand the list. So hopefully, I think any vehicle type that you have should be covered in this report. Just to say as well that if I put in 1 mile here, because I've already submitted some previous reports, you'll see that this yellow exclamation mark comes up. What that's telling you, if you hover over, is that it's significantly different from the average of the previous values that you submitted for diesel car miles in reports you've done before. So this might not be as applicable for you this year, but if next year you go to do another report, you think, why has that got an exclamation mark? That's just a kind of data quality flag that we've got in the system, just to kind of notify you. You can still submit it, but just to notify you that it's very different from the values that you've submitted previously. And obviously that could be that you've drastically reduced the diesel car miles. Maybe you've transitioned to using HVO, for example, rather than diesel. But just to kind of, it's just there in case you've made a typo, basically. So just don't be alarmed if that comes up. I can still submit the report if you want to do that. When you're done, you need to mark section as complete. However, you'll notice that this comes up because what we need to do is, in order to make sure that you don't miss any data, either enter values into the report or just click NA here. So it's either or. So I'll just NA this, just the purpose of this. But say I've got, I don't know, 1,000 miles there, and just kind of NA this. And then once you've completed your report, you can click Mark Sections Complete, click No to these questions as well. Sorry, I forgot that. And then that'll then change to a green tick up here. If then you realise, oops, I've forgotten to add our petrol car, and you think, oh no, I can't click on the cell, that's just because you've marked the section as complete. So you can untick that. You can then enter, your petrol car miles, and then mark the section as complete again. So if you ever have something like that, I just double check that that it's not kind of grayed out because you've marked it as complete. And that's just designed so that If you've got more than one kind of colleague who's filling out different parts of the report, you can just kind of track who's done which sections quite easily by looking across the top at the ticks and that sort of thing. So just to kind of help you visually see what parts of the report you've done, what you've got left to do, etc. So I hope in terms of like the actual report that kind of makes sense of how to use it. It's hopefully fairly self-explanatory. If you do have any questions when you're doing it, I can send you the details afterwards. We've got a support email, which is info@sustainabilitytool.com, and our support team more than happy to help you just with any queries like that. But hopefully it's fairly self-explanatory. And what I would encourage you to do is to register as soon as you can if you haven't already after the session, even if you just have a look at the report, just to kind of so you know you've got access and just to have a look around at the different tabs, just so you can kind of familiarise yourselves a little bit. And then if you've got any questions, obviously we're here to help. But I think just registering for an account, at least then you've got it, and you can start having a look. As I said, I'll go through the other tabs in more of a high level, but just so we've kind of covered it. So fossil fuels, hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory with different fuel types. Again, here we've got kind of a selection of other fuels. With this section, as well, just to kind of point out that if you've got your company transport in, you don't know your mileage, but you know your fuelage, you can enter that fuelage here instead. So just to kind of let you know, and you could enter it in the fossil fuel section alternatively if you wanted, but just make sure you're not double counting that. So you're either reporting fuelage in vehicles or mileage, not both. Um, so with fuel, yeah, obviously enter that here. This is a good example of a section where you could kind of use what we call proxy data, which is basically calculated data. So if, for example, you don't know your company mileage, you don't know the fuel usage, but you know how much, say, you spent on, I don't know, petrol for your company vehicle or like fleet of vans. What you could do is you could obviously research, the average price per litre of petrol for 2024, and basically calculate for the how much you spent, how with the MPG, basically like approximately how many either miles or liters of fuel that you've used. So things like that, if you haven't got that primary data, you can calculate, and they're all valid ways of collecting data. Just always make sure that with anything like that, you've kind of calculated, just to put a comment in the box of how you've calculated that. And that's just really so that when you come to this next year, you know what methodology you use this year to do, because I know a year's a long time, and it just means that then you kind of know, oh, how did we get that last year? You just go in and easily check. So I'd really kind of invite you to use this comment section. This is not used for anything else. This is just kind of your section to just use to support you with the report or add any context that you think might be useful. Then got fugitive emissions, which basically from refrigerants. If you don't have any refrigerants, then just click no. This section, for the most, probably isn't relevant, but if it is, you can report that in here. Then got an electricity tab, which is basically just your electricity, and you also have the opportunity to put about whether you use renewable energy and whether you generate any renewable energy on site. With this, make sure we've got it in the right unit. And hopefully this section's more straightforward to kind of get the data from any kind of bills, etc. We then have the materials tab, which will be varyingly relevant depending on the kind of nature of your organisation. So if you obviously are a manufacturer or trade, this will be a very key section for you to fill out. It's broken down into two sections: materials that are kind of do you manufacture products using raw materials, or more like day-to-day handling of those materials. So the difference with that would be if you're a brick manufacturer, you'd enter the information in the first section. If you're then using those bricks, like laying those bricks, you put them in the second category. So that's just kind of that differentiation there. And with these, it's a fairly comprehensive drop-down list. We've got distinction between concrete and low carbon concrete. So if you have made that switch to a low carbon alternative, you can enter that in, and that will then be reflected in your overall emissions. And obviously it will be lower. Same with steel. We've got regular steel and low carbon steel as well in here. So that'll be, a really relevant section if you are kind of be handling on manufacturing kind of products. But if you're not, if you're kind of in the more consultancy or different sort of sector, or this section won't be relevant to you, so you can just kind of click no to these. We then have waste, which it really is dependent on whether you're already collecting this. This is a prime example of a section where if you're not currently gathering data on this, this would be something that would be a really good thing to start doing to kind of more comprehensively measure your carbon footprint. With this, it's broken down into different types of waste. So I know it looks like quite a long list, but it's really simplified so that is it, paper waste, is it plastic, etc. And with that, you can then kind of click and then actually choose the destination of that waste as well. So whether it's recycled or combusted, landfill, etc. The water tab is my personal favourite tab because it is one question and it's just litres of water. And so hopefully that's a more straightforward tab to kind of fill out as well. Then have a fairly new addition, which is a remote working tab. So with this is basically the annual hours that was undertaken working from home. So with this, obviously, like you may not have employees working from home, you may not currently have that data, but it's just something that you can start collecting to more comprehensively measure your carbon footprint. So with the home working hours, we're not expecting you to have a tally of exactly how many hours everyone's worked, but if roughly how many employees or how many employees they do work from home, how many days a week, you can calculate that kind of over the year fairly easily. So yeah, that's kind of that section. But anything like that, again, you could pop a comment in the box just to kind of note down how you calculated that value there. We've then got the other emissions tab. So what this is basically if there's anything, so if you do have other emissions to report, you can click yes. And this is basically a section that if there's anything else that the emissions for that hasn't been covered in the previous tabs, you can enter that here. So for example, if you I know bought some office equipment and the embodied carbon for that, you can put that in here, etc. So it's just really if there's anything extra, you can put this in. But obviously, if you don't have anything extra to report, just click no. It's just if you do, there's the option there to put it. We then just have some more kind of qualitative kind of section here, which is basically just for you to show what current kind of policies and strategies you're kind of undertaking as an organisation. And this is really, you're not going to be penalised for not having carbon reduction strategies or anything, but it's just more so that Ebbsfleet and other clients can kind of get a feel for where you're at with this process and just kind of where what kind of you've done so far. And as I said, it's not that you'd be penalised for not, but it's just the opportunity to kind of show what you're doing. So you can kind of put in whether you've got any targets set or science-based targets, if you're kind of ISO 14001 accredited, that sort of thing. And with that, you can kind of click that, and then there's kind of the opportunity to upload a document upload as well, just to evidence that. But as I said, if you don't, you can just click no to these questions. That's completely fine. The final tab is the company information tab. So this is basically your full company turnover in pounds, and then your number of full-time equivalent employees. So with this, there's always sometimes some questions or concerns about disclosing turnover. Just to kind of reassure you that no one's going to, the only people who have access to your full report would be me and any colleagues working on your account, and we will at no point disclose any of the data that's submitted. The only data that Kelly, for example, will be able to see is the apportioned sliver of the report that you've kind of said, yeah, that relates to work with Ebbsfleet. And so, for example, if you'd apportioned 10% to Ebbsfleet, Kelly would see 10% of all the values you report, but she won't know that that's 10%. It could be 1%, it could be 50%. It's an unknown percentage. So you won't be disclosing kind of your company turnover or the spend you have with different clients, with your clients directly. It'll all kind of be confidential. And it's really important that you do enter your turnover here because it means that then in your dashboard, you'll be able to then see a normalised figure. So you'll be able to see your emissions per £1 million of turnover. And why that's useful is because when hopefully you've submitted this year's data and next year's, you can then kind of compare year on year emissions, taking into consideration business growth or kind of increased turnover. And because if hopefully your business say the turnover increased by 50%, great news, between 2 years, likely your company's emissions also will increase with the kind of growing size of your organisation. But actually, using that relative kind of calculation of emissions per £1 million of turnover, actually your emissions, relatively speaking, might have gone down, and that's why it's really important to be able to kind of compare that year on year, and to kind of see, relatively speaking, the direction your emissions are going in over time. And with this section as well, this sounds extremely obvious, but I really wanted to point it out because it does happen more than you'd imagine. With this, please make sure to put in the full number, not just say £20. And please make sure to enter it as 20 million. I think that's 20 million. Just rather than putting kind of 20 and then million like this, for example. That does happen more often than you'd imagine. So just make sure that it is in um, a full number. And as I said, if you do make a mistake like that, obviously we can go back and you can edit that report and we can unlock that for you. But just so that save you time, and just to kind of make sure that's entered in a full value. So that's the report itself. I know it seems like a lot of tabs, but hopefully it's broken down in those just to make it kind of distinct categories. As I said, we're not expecting you to have absolutely every aspect of this data, but I think really the key message is for this year, report what you have and look to expand the kind of remit of data that you are collecting in order to more kind of fully cover your carbon footprint in subsequent reports. I think that's kind of the main thing that we really want you to do. And we've got to start somewhere. And even if you've only got some data, you know, there's nothing wrong with submitting that, and then just looking at kind of what else could we start collecting that we don't currently do for this project. And as I said, this is not designed to just be kind of 1 year. It's very much a kind of just an exercise to do each year to kind of build into your kind of process. So I hope that makes sense. I know it seems like a lot, but I think that it's all laid out and you don't have to do any calculations. And once you submit this, then all the emissions will be calculated in the background, and then you'll see that in your dashboard, which I'll show you very shortly. I'm not sure, Kelly, is there anything you wanted to kind of add to the actual report part in terms of the kind of data that we're asking for? Or are you kind of happy with kind of what we've covered?
Yeah, I think in terms of how ADC have done this piece of work, when I first started, we looked at what we were already collecting, which was people's mileage claims and the amount of sort of transport that we procured, and that was sort of the activity that was quite easy for us, and things like sort of gas and electric. It was really sort of getting in touch with our supplier for missing data and things like that. So there'll be a bit of admin, but once, as Annabelle said, once it's set up, it's sort of fairly straightforward to do each year. But yeah, definitely we've done that sort of growth of increasing the amount of data that we've been able to collect. So yeah, I think this is in terms of the actual piece of work, it's a much simpler system because you don't have to assign any of the emissions factors and look up for any changes. As Annabelle said, it does it all for you. So it's really a good solution.
Great, thanks for that, Kelly. But yeah, I think that really is a good example of like in practice, kind of how organisations do this. And I think it's the intention. It's it, you can you've got to start somewhere, and then we can kind of build on that year on year. And yeah, it's kind of basically designed to be as kind of make it as streamlined and simple as possible to do as a kind of entryway. But obviously as well, if you've got loads of data, great, report what you've got. But yeah, I think it's just really kind of we can kind of expand that year on year. The final section is where you actually report to your clients. So this is basically, as you can see here, if you're basically assigned and identified as a target supplier on other people's target list, then you'll appeal here. So this is a test account. So I'm not personally a supplier to these companies, but you could be. So when you log in, don't be alarmed if you see a few kind of clients you work with there. They will just identified you as one of their target suppliers as well. So your Ebbsfleet will appear here, and then potentially some other clients. So, this is all here, there, but you also can apportion the drop-down box here. So, for example, you can find Ebbsfleet there, and then you get a portion however many, what percent is relevant to them. You can do it to as many decimal places as you want as well. So I'd really encourage you to make that percentage as accurate as possible, and click add, and that'll be there. As I said, kind of towards the start, obviously, Ebbsfleet are asking you to do this, but if you do see any other clients that you've worked with in 2024 in this drop-down list, I'd really just encourage you to apportion to them as well, even if they haven't asked you to, because it's likely that they may ask you to do it retrospectively, and if not, it's not going to, it's a really good thing to be kind of proactively demonstrating your commitment to sustainability, and you're kind of actively taking carbon reporting seriously, and kind of doing that without being prompted. So yeah, it's kind of a win-win for everyone if you can do that. If you just apportion to Ebbsfleet, and then someone else reaches out to you to do this, you can retrospectively edit the apportionment, and I'll show you how to do that. And it's not like once it's submitted, like it's locked in. You can go and edit that and add that later. But just simple as do it kind of all in one go. Once you've done that, you click save, and that would then kind of turn that to a green tick on that final step. I'm not actually going to submit this report because I haven't actually filled anything out, but just to kind of say that once that's submitted, yeah, that'll go to that green tick. Once you've done all 4 steps, you'll be able to submit it. As I haven't, it's blocking me from doing that. And then once you've submitted your report, the page will then refresh and you'll be taken to your dashboard. So as I said, this is all data that I fabricated, but just so you can kind of see what the interface looks like. So you can see your data broken down by scope. So that's basically just what type of emissions. You can see total emissions. You can toggle this by year. You can see emissions over time. So you can see that I've kind of submitted some not continuous reports, but if there are continuous reports, those lines will then show nicely like this. And then this is that emissions per turnover section, which I referred to kind of earlier in the demo, where you can compare your relative emissions, taking into consideration kind of increase in turnover. And this is a really good example. You can see here that the 2023 emissions in this example are nearly 30,000 tons of carbon equivalent, which is higher than 2021. Then actually, if we're looking at the relative emissions, because the turnover was a lot higher here, actually, relatively speaking, the intensity of those emissions were actually lower. So that's kind of why it's nice to have this side-by-side comparison when you've got a few years of data to be able to see the trends in your emissions over time, both kind of the actual overall emissions and also per 1 million pounds of turnover as well. You've also then got an option to analyze your hotspots. So what this means is basically you can look at then the breakdown of all the data you've submitted, actually where the majority of those emissions are coming from. So you can do this by activity here. So if you click on this kind of button, you can then see here all the different kind of types, like sources of activities, kind of relating to the activities that you've submitted. So you can see in this example that emissions from company transport are the biggest contributor because the numbers are the highest. Um, you can see that relatively speaking, electricity is fairly low, etc. So it really depends on the type of organisation you have as to where your hotspots will be. If you're a grounds worker, it'd be likely that your material usage would be the highest because you're using a lot of concrete, steel, that sort of thing. And with these as well, you can click on the bars to compare. So if I wanted to have a look and compare fossil fuels versus water, I can click on both of those and see kind of the bars side by side here. I can just click on one, have a look at fossil fuels over time. If I want to have a look at the emissions for my materials, I can click on that and see where I've done that. So you can kind of delve into the data. You can click on a few bars at once as well if you want to kind of compare several. You can kind of click on 3 and compare those. So I'd really kind of invite you, once you have submitted your report, have a play around with the dashboard, have a look at your data, just even out of interest, so you kind of got a bit of a starting point and understanding of kind of where the emissions in your operation sort of lie, relatively speaking. You can also look at that broken down by scope. So you can kind of look at scope 1, 2, and 3, kind of comparably. And then finally, you can kind of look at the total emissions, and then also do that total emissions per 1 million pounds of turnover. So if you want to have that kind of in one graph, you can click on both of those and then kind of compare those comparatively there. And with your report as well, just to kind of note that everything's exportable as well. So you can export, if you go dashboard menu here, I can export the inputs and the indicators. So what that means is the inputs is the actual data that you entered into the report in the first place, like the mileage and stuff. You can export all of that into Excel format. And you also can export the indicators. So that's basically everything in this dashboard that's then been calculated, the kind of emissions that have been calculated. So you can kind of do that if you want that in numerical value to use in any reports yourself, and you've got that option as well. So that's kind of the dashboard and the report. What I will show you quickly is just how to update the apportionment if you wanted. I've already done this here, but if you do need to update the apportionment for any reason, you can click on the arrow and edit apportionment and edit that here to kind of whoever's been asked to. If you do need to make any changes to your report, if you contact the support team, which will give you the email address to afterwards, they'll be more than happy to unlock your report for you and guide you through the process to basically just to edit it. Um, that's absolutely fine. So I think that's kind of the system in a nutshell. I'll just kind of show you how to register just so that if you're keen to, we can. But as I said, we'll begin the links and everything to do this afterwards. But essentially, and this is the kind of landing page, and you go to create a supplier account, and then basically you can enter your first name, surname, your work email address, create a password, and then just enter your company name, and just make sure to do that in full here, just to make sure that we can easily identify your account in the system. And if then when you go to the next step, if someone in your organization has already created an account, that'll come up and you can just basically request to join that account rather than creating a new one. And that's basically identified based on your email domain. So if you've got the same email domain as a colleague and they've already created an account, you'll then be able to join that hopefully fairly easily. So what I'll do now is I'll bring up the slide deck just to kind of show you next steps, really what actually does this mean, what in practice do you need to do, by when, etc. So I said with the next steps, it's really three steps: register for an account, gather your data, and then submit your report. So I know that's obviously really oversimplifying it, but the easy first step is to register. The links here, as I said, will give you some kind of information on how to do that as well afterwards. Once you've got an account, look at the report. What kind of data have you already got? As Kelly said, kind of identify, okay, what data are we already collecting? Where can we get that from? And as Kelly said, the first time is the most difficult because you're working out where to get the data from. Once you've identified actually where you can get data from, it's a lot easier than just to kind of get that for each annual report. Once you've gathered all the data that you can, then you submit the report, making sure also to portion to Ebbsfleet, and that's then you done for 2024. So the important information to end on, as I said kind of at the start, the request is for you to report 2024's data, and the deadline for this is the 16th of January 2026. So you've got a good over 2 months to kind of gather this and report it. I would, encourage you maybe to do this side of the festive period, because I imagine by the time we get back in January, you would have hopefully forgotten everything and had a nice time, hopefully off, kind of over December. So deadline for 16th of January, and yeah, it's 2024 data. I'm not sure, Kelly, if anything you wanted to just kind of reiterate, again, then we can kind of open the floor for any questions.
No, I think we've covered everything. I just would like to just say that if you are sort of if you do have any questions, then please reach out to the guys, because that's part of the package. It's a free service, and that there is free advice. And I think with all of the work that companies are doing now, there isn't sort of there's always questions of companies now being asked, sort of, can you share your emissions? So this is such a simple way to do that if you're not already doing it, and it really does go a long way, particularly for winning work and sort of showcasing how you're looking at your sustainability sort of ambitions. But yeah, if there's any questions, then I'm sure Annabelle can answer those.
Yeah, so feel free to put any message in the chat. I'll also give you a few minutes to kind of type anything out. Obviously, if you haven't got any questions, and I've clearly covered everything perfectly, that's completely fine. And obviously, as well, if because it always happens, if once we leave the session, you think, oh, I forgot to ask that, you can contact the support team who can help you. So what I will do is just pop the support team email address in the chat as well. We'll send it out separately, but just so you've got it there to help you. Yeah, and if there's any kind of questions, anything that you need support with, the team can help. So yeah, I'll pop that in the chat. There we go. So I've popped that in the chat there, but as I said, that'll we'll cover that in follow-up email as well. You'll receive the slide deck, the meeting recording. We've also got a carbon calculator guide as well, which is a pretty comprehensive kind of document that goes through the different tabs and different parts of the report. So if you want to kind of read through it rather than rewatching the session about any specific parts that we've covered, or any kind of that's got kind of tips and tricks of like where to get data from and that sort of thing, we can share that with you as well. So we've got a question from Andrew. So I was wondering how this, oh, sorry, another question came through. So I'm wondering how this relates to an existing something. Is it a partial carbon footprint requested 5 scope 3 categories, including upstream and down? So that's a great question. So if you're already, so this basically is scope 1, scope 2, and then it's purchase goods and services with category 1 of scope 3. So with scope 3, it's quite a complex area to report, and this is basically designed to kind of almost get the measure the easier part of scope 3. So if you are kind of more comprehensively like with looking at your scope 3 and looking at your supply chain, obviously you can submit that in the other emissions section. But basically, like with this, it's kind of your parts of scope 3, if that makes sense. Like it's your materials, your waste, that sort of thing. Whereas, example for Ebbsfleet, they're then looking at a step further, looking at then their supply chains emissions, which are also scope 3. And if you are interested in kind of actually looking at your supply chain's emissions, feel free to reach out, because you can become a client of the carbon calculator as well, to kind of actually look at your supply chain's apportioned data like Ebbsfleet are. Oh, that's from Hannah. So I was about to say, got a question, but that's from Hannah. Great. Has anyone else got any further questions? As I said, we've got 9 minutes left, so we've got plenty of time. But at the same time, if you don't have any questions, that's also completely fine. As I said, we'll have all the materials sent to you so that you can kind of refer back to everything. If you do want to share, the recording with any colleagues, you can absolutely do that. Completely up to you. If you've kind of sat in the session and thought, okay, this is great, but actually I'm probably not quite the right person to be doing that, that's completely fine. We can kind of, you can add whoever you want to your account. So if you want to have access, but actually grant colleagues access, you can do that, and either by registering, but also you can reach out to our support team to help you with kind of the user management if you want to kind of add anyone to your account. You can have as many people as you want with access if you want to kind of yeah, give someone access to have a look at it. You can do that if you need someone to report, etc. There's no limit on the number of users you have. Okay, great. I'll give a couple minutes of silence to have any questions kind of filtered through. Yeah, and then we can end it there. Unless there's anything else you wanted to add, Kelly.
No, just my thanks really for
Yeah.
everyone joining. This is the first time that we've worked with the sustainability school, so I'm really pleased that this has been successful. But yeah, I'd like to hear how people are doing. Yeah, so look forward to working with you.
Yeah, just to reiterate, Kelly, thank you very much for joining. I know that in our session it's a lot out of the diary. I really appreciate you making the time to come. And hopefully, it's kind of made as straightforward as possible. You're not having to do the calculation. It's really just kind of the actual data, and then it just means that you can kind of obviously apportion to Ebbsfleet and other clients, and it's an increasing thing. But more and more clients are kind of requiring as part of tenders and things. So it's really just an opportunity to kind of get ahead of the curve and just start doing this now, so that you're kind of future-proofing your business. Okay, great. Don't think we've had any other questions through. I'm always hesitant to end it in case someone's typing something out. Um, I'll give it 1 more minute, and then if not, we can leave it there. I don't want to. Oh, Fab, we've got a question. Thank you very much, Hannah, for reading that. So we've got, can we personalise our own emission factors rather than rely on generic? So that's a really great question. So the system does use not standard emission factors, it uses a selection. So if you're interested, the majority of emission factors are DEFRA, so the government emission factors, but then we also use Bath ICE for the material section because that's a more kind of comprehensive data set. So that's what will be applied to the system. If you've got your own specific emission factors, for example, for like any specific materials, that sort of thing, what I'd invite you to do is to make those calculations separately and then add that in the other emissions tab and then just put in the comment section what emission factor you've used for that data, just so we know what's been applied. But with the system, it's kind of designed to be a standardized process that everyone's emissions have been calculated in the same way. But yeah, if you do have any kind of specific ones for anything that you use specifically, you can calculate that separately and then just add that into the other emissions tab. So I hope that answers your question. And then we've got a second question about is the outcome a verified report? So it's not verified, but we do have a consultancy part of our organisation, which we can put you in touch with if you want to kind of interpret the data once you've submitted it to kind of have a look at an action plan or that sort of thing and kind of actually look at the data in terms of like what you could do for carbon reduction strategies and that sort of thing. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, great. I think that's not all the questions we've had. Um, so if you're happy to, Kelly, I think we can leave it there. I'll give everyone 5 minutes back. How generous.
Yeah. Um, yeah, sorry, my internet just dropped out right at the end there. Did you touch on the point about the verified report?
Yes, yeah, I've
Yeah,
gone through
okay,
that.
cool. Thanks.
Perfect.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much again. Yeah, and again, looking forward to seeing the results.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time. Yes, let us know if you've got any questions.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.